Hi, everybody. This is Tim Desmond with Pure Collective, and today we're going to do a training that's sort of tools for regulation. I'll talk more specifically about that, what that means. So a quick overview, and this training might be a little shorter than some of our other trainings. We'll see how it goes. First, we're going to talk about what does regulation mean and what does dysregulation mean. When it makes sense to sort of teach self-regulation tools. And then we'll go through a handful of tools, sort of progressive relaxation, mindfulness, self-compassion, visualization, and sort of objects in the room, coming back to the room. So a quick overview, but basically, so what is regulation? What is dysregulation? I'm going to move my video so that we can see the slide a little better. So in every moment of our lives, our brains and our body are constantly assessing for danger, trying to sort of get a sense of, are we in a moment of threat? Are we in a safe situation where we can sort of relax, rest, digest, or are we in a dangerous situation? And if we're in a dangerous situation, then we need to sort of get ready to protect ourselves and survive. If a threat is perceived, many physiological changes happen. Many physiological systems will sort of activate. Our blood pressure goes up, our heart rate goes up, adrenaline and those sorts of hormones are released in our blood. And we actually have a reduced activity in our sort of frontal cortex, the part of us. And so what that means is that when we perceive a threat, we become less able, because of that reduced front brain activity, less able to think analytically, which basically is sort of like our slow thinking of like being really thoughtful and kind of and careful in how we're thinking. And we become a lot more reliant on our automatic reactions, which is basically our fast thinking. And the way that evolutionary psychologists talk about this is that in a real moment of danger, so let's say you're a hunter-gatherer and you hear kind of a rustling in the woods, and then out jumps a saber-toothed tiger. And let's say you're somehow able to get away. You run, you fight, you make it away. The next time you're around the campfire and you hear any type of rustling in the woods, if it reminds you of the sound you heard right before you saw a tiger, your body is going to start getting ready to get out of there as fast as possible. And that's really gives us an evolutionary advantage. You don't stop and reflect and ask yourself, well, is that rustling a little different? You just start to react because it's a life or death kind of situation. However, when we react, when our bodies are reacting to a threat, there's a question, which is, how real is that threat? Sometimes we're reacting when we have that sort of physiological fight or flight kind of response. Some people call it fight, flight, or freeze response. We're kind of getting ready to try to survive. Sometimes the threat is real and likely. If you are in a situation of actual danger, like for example, physical danger, having that reaction is going to help your survival and is completely appropriate. Sometimes the difficulty is that the real danger, where our body is getting ready to try to survive, and the danger is possible, but it's really unlikely. So, for example, that might be a situation where if I was in a car crash, and now anytime I get in a car, my body is just tensing and getting ready for the car to crash. Well, I've been driving for 20-something years, and I've only had one car crash. So it's pretty unlikely that this in this moment, I'm about to have another car crash, but there's something in my body that knows it's possible. And so just trying to tell myself it's not going to happen it isn't realistic. So there's something that's real and likely. There's something that's possible, but pretty unlikely. And then there's something that's a total misperception. And my favorite example of this was when my son was 3. He didn't want to get into his bed. There was a few nights in a row he didn't want to get into his bed. And when I asked why, he said, well, because there are bees in my bed. We had just been reading a Winnie the Pooh book, and there were bees and, stealing honey. And he was just really scared that there were bees in his bed. And so we ended up, looking under the covers and seeing that there weren't actually bees in his bed. Some of our fears, some of our reactions are based on total misperceptions. We thought something was true when it wasn't. We thought someone was angry at us when they actually weren't, and they don't actually match up with reality. So when we're having this kind of reaction, it could be that the threat is real and likely. It could be that the threat is possible, but very unlikely. And it could be that the threat is just completely fabricated. And that's important because dysregulation, I want to define dysregulation as having a threat response in your body when the danger isn't real. You're not actually in danger, or at least that the threat response is completely out of proportion with the amount of real danger. And on the other hand, regulation, sort of being regulated, is the state of your body's threat level matches to some degree external reality. And so basically what that means is when we're regulated, when we're well regulated, what that means is that if you're safe, you feel safe. If you're unsafe, you feel unsafe. It's healthy to feel unsafe if you are unsafe. But what happens for so many of us in life is that we can be in a safe, or at least a pretty safe environment, and we don't really feel safe. And that's an important type of dysregulation that's we're going to talk about. So when should we teach regulation tools? Well, first, and again, I'm going to make this smaller so you can see, it's appropriate to teach regulation tools when, first, the person that you're talking to is giving you explicit feedback that you understand their situation. You've already gotten verbal and explicit feedback that when the person is describing their problem, you're just kind of reflecting it back and seeing, is it like this? Do I get it? Do I get what you're going? Is there anything that I'm missing? Is there anything else that you want me to hear so I can really understand where you're coming from? So once the person's like, no, you get it. Then number 2, the person tells you explicitly that they want to learn how to deal with their situation differently. Now, maybe you ask them, are you here to, are you just kind of looking for empathy and kind of somebody to be here with you? Or are you looking to sort of, are you interested in trying to learn, a way to deal with this differently? You might ask that, or they might, offer it, but that they've said, I want to learn how to deal with this situation differently. And then when the person says that they want to learn something, they want to learn a new skill, that you believe learning how to, that an important thing for them to learn that would really change the problem that they're talking about is that if they could figure out a way to feel safe in a safe environment, or feel sort of rest, like a lot of this has to do with stress, right? Because when we're talking about that kind of threat response, that's basically almost synonymous with stress. So I want to learn how to be relaxed, be in a sort of rest, digest, relaxed kind of state in the environment that I'm in. So the idea is that I don't need to I don't need to change my environment, or maybe I can't change my environment. And what I want to learn how to do is to feel not so threatened by the situation that I'm in. I want to learn how to feel more comfortable with the exterior situation that I'm in. Now, sometimes that's not appropriate, but in situations where I either can't change my external reality, or it doesn't seem like the sort of the first step or the step that I'm interested in. What I want to learn is how to feel differently in the situation that I'm in. I want to learn how to feel safer and more relaxed in the situation that I'm in. So when all those are the case, and it makes sense to teach some of these tools, and we're going to go through a handful of tools. And the thing that I want to kind of emphasize the most is that different people have radically different responses to different regulation tools. And then it makes the most sense that you're going to have you're probably going to be the most helpful teaching people regulation tools, at least regulation tools that make sense to you, and especially regulation tools that you find personally helpful, that you use sometimes, or at least that you have. So now let's go through some of these tools. So next, we're going to talk, so the first tool that I want to talk about is relaxation. In cognitive behavior therapy, or in just behavioral therapy, they'll sometimes call this progressive relaxation. What this is doing is training yourself to notice tension, distress, whatever that threat response, how you feel it. Maybe it's a racing heart, maybe it's rapid breath. It could be like tightness in your chest, in your throat, whatever bodily reaction you're having to stress or to threat, perceived threat. To notice it, and then you're teaching yourself how to consciously and intentionally relax it. So often you'll choose one part at a time. So the kind of step one is noticing the tension, the threat response, the stress in the body. And now with someone that I'm working with, for some people, it might make sense to sort of ask them to think about their problem and then in order to get in touch with that tension or that stress. Other people, they're already feeling it. They feel it all the time. So you just want to make sure that they're feeling it in their body, because this is sort of like a body, physiological kind of practice. So the tension's there, the stress is there, you're feeling it in your body. And I like to say, ideally, learning one of these practices, the level of stress or tension or whatever should be between like a 4 and an 8 out of 10. If it's less than a 4, then it's not really good practice. If it's higher than an 8, then you're likely to get overwhelmed. It's going to be too hard to practice. So somewhere in that middle zone, I'm feeling that tension, that stress in my body. And then depending on what makes sense to you, or you can ask them to try different ways, one thing that I like to say is we can try a few different practices until we find one that works for you. And it's fine if this one doesn't, we can try some others. So sometimes with progressive relaxation, you'll start at the bottom of your feet. Say like, okay, so now see if you can relax your feet, relax your ankles, relax your legs. Take a deep breath and, relax your upper legs and your hips and kind of go all the way up like that. You might start at the top of your head. And so again, like with a deep breath, see if you can relax the top of your head. See if you can relax your forehead. See if you can relax your eyes and your face. With a deep breath, see if you can relax your neck and your throat. Sort of you kind of bring somebody through different parts of their body. You can start at the bottom, you can start at the top, or if someone is describing that their tension is all in their chest, then you might say, okay, so you're feeling that tension in your chest. And what I'd like for you to do is just see if you can. That tension is a physical sensation in your chest. See if you can take a deep breath and just start to let go of that tension. And with each breath, see if you can relax, see if you can let go of that tension in your chest. So you can start it in different places. But again, that's a practice of consciously, deliberately taking a tense body and just relaxing it. Now there's sort of another practice that we could even call the opposite of relaxation. Just see. So like sort of the opposite of relaxation, we could say, is the practice of mindfulness, which is we start off in the same way. So notice the tension, the stress, that sort of feeling of danger in your body. Maybe think about that problem we talked about until you can really feel it there, or maybe it's already there. And once it's there, and so you're telling me, yeah, it's this heaviness in my chest, it's this tightness in my throat. And maybe we just tried the relaxation and it didn't work. You can start in different ways. The person's feeling the heaviness in their chest, the tightness in their throat. And so what you say is, so what I'd like for you to do is see if you can, rather than trying to make this tension go away, see if you can just give yourself permission to feel it. So I'm not trying to relax it away. Instead, I'm trying to learn how to tolerate that physical sensation. It's an uncomfortable physical sensation. But sometimes trying to make your discomfort go away, trying to make tension go away, actually is stressful. It can actually make it worse. And so if that's what someone's experiencing, then sort of the opposite of just sort of saying like, well, tightness in your throat is actually not that bad. It's not, it's uncomfortable. But if you just let it be a sensation in your body, see if you can develop your ability to tolerate some discomfort. Because the more that we can tolerate uncomfortable sensations in our body, the more that we don't feel kind of panicked when they come up, the more that they don't end up kind of getting so out of control. So then I'm feeling this heaviness in my chest, this tension in my throat. And so you say to me, so see if you can just for a minute, we're going to try something. It may or may not work for you, but let's see how it goes. See if you can just let those sensations be there. They're not comfortable, totally, but see if you can just tolerate them, even though they're kind of uncomfortable. And see, you might even say to yourself, it's okay for this tension to be there. I don't need it to go away. I can just feel it. It can stay or go as much as it wants. And in fact, I'm strong enough to tolerate this. And then there might be sort of a part or a voice in that person that says, I do want this tension to go away. And if that comes up, then we just allow that part to be there too. So we might say, okay, so see if you can accept, so the tension is there, right? Yeah. And that voice in you that's like, I hate this tension is there. Yeah. See if you can just let them both be there. Can you tolerate that you're feeling this tension and tolerate that there's a part of you that hates it? That's just the situation you're in right now. Can you let both of those things be true? And that often that type of what we might call radical acceptance of how we're feeling in the present actually makes people feel a lot better. Sort of, but it's approaching in almost the opposite way from like deliberately trying to relax or make it go away. A third tool is self-compassion. So again, the same thing. You're asking me to notice the tension or threat response in my body, and what I'm saying is like, yeah, it's like, um, yeah, I just feel really nervous, kind of agitated. I don't know, scared. Just like, I just having racing thoughts. And you say, so yeah, and what's it like in your body? Yeah, it's like, just really tight. And I just can't stop thinking about all these problems. And you say, okay, so notice all that happening in your body. Notice how uncomfortable, like when you're thinking those things, notice how that feels in your body. And then see if you can, see if it's possible. This may or may not click for you. See if you can explicitly send love and compassion to the part of you that's suffering. To send love and compassion right to the spot in you that feels all of this tension, all of this distress. And again, so it might work. Maybe the source of that love and compassion might come from yourself, or it might come from another being. So you might imagine your grandmother sending you love and compassion. You might imagine your dog. You might imagine a religious image sending you love and compassion. The source isn't so much what's important. It's that you're picturing love and compassion directed toward the part of you that's suffering. It's another sort of tool for regulating. And then finally, visualization. So in a similar way, we notice the tension or threat response in the body. And so I'm saying like, yeah, just like, it's like heavy in my chest and it's like, I'm really feeling tight. And it's just like, yeah, I'm just feeling so stressed out. I can't, it's like hard. Like if I picture myself, having to deal with this, it's just really hard. And then we might say, okay, so, you're feeling that. As you're feeling that, can you now picture yourself somewhere in some context where you're perfectly calm and safe? Like, where would you be? What would it look like? Can you imagine yourself in a place where you would be totally safe and calm and just kind of like have everything that you need? And so it's like a little more open-ended than the self-compassion, but it's sort of like visualizing just having what you need in that moment. And then the kind of last tool that I want to talk about comes from working with acute trauma. So if someone is talking about an acute trauma, it's possible for them to get totally overwhelmed. And so what I mean by that is their body starts reacting. Not necessarily that they believe this is happening, but their body starts reacting as though the trauma were happening now as you're talking. In trauma therapy, that's often called hyperarousal, which means like sort of all of these physiological processes are on overdrive. Heart rate, blood pressure, they're just kind of like really, they're not able to talk that well. They're just like kind of really triggered. If that's happening, the first thing that we want to be able to do is ask them to feel their body. So let's say if they're sitting down, can you feel your body in the chair where you are now? Can you feel your feet on the floor? If they're holding their phone, can you feel your phone in your hand? Just bringing them back to sensations in their body now. And then can you name 3 things in the room where you are now? So what you're doing is you're kind of breaking the trance of them, sort of like, it almost feels like they're elsewhere. And you're asking them to be like, so right now in the room where you are, where are your feet? Where, can you feel the weight of your body? What is around you right now? And that often will pull somebody back out of that sort of hyperarousal state. If that happens in a session, don't return to the topic of their trauma. Don't talk about that anymore, especially in that session, because what that lets you know is that the person needs to learn more regulation skills before it's safe for them to sort of like talk about or process their trauma. And you can get, it's good to, that would be a great time to sort of reach out to me or another supervisor to be able to sort of get supervision and support in terms of like being responsible and sort of helping somebody with their trauma. So that's sort of like the main content that I wanted to go over in this training. I'm curious if there are any questions or thoughts or examples, if anybody wants to bring up anything like that. Or if you want to, if there's any of those tools that you're curious, like how would that look if you were trying to sort of use it in a certain context.
I have a question, Tim.
Sure.
If someone basically, because these are very amazing tools, I've used them myself, but I want to be able to know if someone's having like a panic attack or if they're having something with post-traumatic stress disorder. I know sometimes people get triggered. I want to be able to utilize that, especially with a post-traumatic stress disorder. I had a client that he forgot he was getting massaged, and someone banged the table and it triggered something from him, I guess from when he was at war.
Sure.
And he grabbed the massage therapist by the neck, and they had to calm him down and bring him back.
Yeah.
Not that it's going to be extreme like this, but it could happen. You know, certain noises and certain things can trigger someone with PTSD. So I was just wondering, maybe you could give me like an example. So
yeah. So that's kind of what I'm talking about there. So in terms of like when I'm talking about acute trauma, it's like this. So the objects in the room tool, so if that happened, if someone was that level of triggered, right? So, and I want to say panic attacks, we want to talk about a little bit differently. And I think I want to do a separate training on panics, on sort of like the experience of panic, because it's a little different. One of the most important, and I'll just mention briefly, one of the biggest triggers around panic is that panic is basically somebody who becomes really afraid of being afraid. Like they get scared of having a panic attack, and that drives the panic attack.
Okay.
So it's like very explicitly that they're like, oh no, I'm gonna have an attack, or oh no, I'm gonna lose control. And then that feeling, we'll go into more detail because I'm gonna do a full one on this. That feeling of that like, oh no, this is gonna happen, makes you feel more scared. And then it sort of ratchets up the amount of sort of agitation in your body. And then you're like, oh yeah, here it is, it's coming. And it becomes this self-fulfilling prophecy. So there's a different way that we want to, I guess I'll just say very briefly, we want to let somebody know that sort of a mentor of mine, Matt McKay, he likes to talk about adrenaline stays in your body, stays in your bloodstream for roughly 15 minutes from the point that you stop scaring yourself, right? And so wanting to sort of explain to somebody how panic works ends up being often really helpful, just like letting them know that it's not that panic is building on its own and you're just watching a panic attack happen. What's happening is you have a small feeling of fear and you start asking yourself, is that going to build into a panic attack? And that thought makes you a little more scared. So then the fear gets a little bigger and you start being like, oh no, it is going to build. And then that makes you more scared, and it starts to go like that. So then once you realize that, it's possible to sort of basically understand, if I can stop scaring myself, I'm going to feel like this for about 15 minutes. So we'll go into a lot more detail about panic because it can be a little more complicated. These tools are definitely appropriate for PTSD. So all the sort of initial tools that we went through,
Mm-hmm.
starting with relaxation, those can be really helpful for helping people to learn how to regulate their bodies, not when they're in sort of like a full PTSD flashback, but kind of how to avoid those. Because for a lot of people with PTSD, just like general distress, like just managing their distress is a huge issue. And
Mm-hmm.
so learning relaxation or mindfulness or self-compassion or visualizations, those tools can be really helpful as like things to develop just to be able to cope better kind of moving through life. However, the type of thing that you're describing is like a real, hyper arousal. Sometimes you call it abreaction, or like a real kind of like a full blown, like someone sort of flashback into their
Mm-hmm.
trauma. When that happens, if someone, if I'm working with somebody and there was like a loud noise and they grab me by the neck, the
Mm-hmm.
first thing that I want to say is like, okay, name 3 things in the room. Can you feel your feet on the ground? Where are you right now? What day is it? So it's a lot of these things of like bringing your I'm here in the present back online.
Okay.
And then once the person's kind of back in that space, you might offer just some sort of caring empathy and just sort of be with them for a little bit. But then these other practices can be helpful at kind of helping them to return to a state of, more safety and regulation.
Thank you. That does make a lot of sense. Yep. Thank you so much.
Great. Okay, well, I think that this was about a half hour, which I think is probably a good amount for this. And if anybody has questions that's not on the webinar, please feel free to either email me or post them in the comment section. This will be up on YouTube very soon. And yeah, thanks very much. And yeah,
Thank you.
bye.